The wind tore through the trees like a living thing, biting at her exposed skin, whipping the icy needles of snow into her face, and driving her forward when every muscle screamed for her to stop. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, and her side throbbed with a pain that made her stagger, clutching the wound she knew she couldn't afford to lose control of. The forest around her was a blur of shadow and frost, each tree looming like a silent sentinel, and through the thick rolling fog she could barely see a few feet ahead. Every step she took was a negotiation with the earth, the snow slick and treacherous beneath her boots. But she ran anyway. She ran because if she didn't, she knew there would be no one left to mourn her, or save her. She could hear them. Not quite behind her, but close enough that her instincts screamed that they were stalking her, silent hunters with eyes that glinted in the shadows. The growls came first, low and guttural, vibrating through the ground itself. Then the snapping of twigs. The soft brush of movement against snow-laden branches. She could feel their presence in the marrow of her bones, feel their intent, and a cold wave of fear crashed over her. But fear alone wouldn't save her. Only movement, only survival, only power. Her own power, the secret she'd been hiding her whole life, stirred inside her like a caged storm. The silver flame, her forbidden gift, flickered along her spine, tiny sparks that danced across her skin whenever she clenched her fists too tightly. It was uncontrolled. Dangerous. The very thing her old pack had branded her for. And now, in the dark of this frozen forest, with the fog twisting like serpents around the skeletal trunks of trees, she felt that power coil and pulse beneath her, aching to be let loose. A part of her wanted to release it, wanted to scorch the world that had rejected her, to strike fear into the hearts of those who hunted her. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not when she didn't know if she could control it. Pain lanced through her side again, sharp enough to steal her breath. She gritted her teeth and forced herself onward, ignoring the way the snow clung to her soaked clothes, how her boots left slick impressions in the frozen earth. Every step was a battle against the cold that seeped through her bones, against the terror that threatened to swallow her whole. And beneath all that, beneath every thought and every nerve-strung reaction, there was anger. Rage. A burning, quiet fury at the fate that had placed her in this moment. At the evil mate she had been chosen for, at the life that had been stolen from her before it could even begin. She hated that fear had company in her chest, hated that doubt had a voice inside her mind whispering, "You can't survive this. You are too weak. You are too small. You are alone." But she wasn't. She had to remember that, even if only for the smallest heartbeat at a time. The forest might be vast and the fog might twist and choke her vision, but she had the strength to keep moving. She had instincts honed sharper than any blade. She had a fire inside her, small but relentless, that refused to be snuffed out. And she would survive. She had to. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, flinging snow like shards of glass into her face, and for a moment she stumbled, tripping over a hidden root beneath the snow. Her hands scraped against frozen earth, fingers numb, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind her the growls deepened, closer now, more threatening. She felt the heat of their gaze even through the mist, predatory and precise. The silver flame along her spine pulsed again, stronger this time, teasing her with a hint of the power she had long tried to hide. Her own pulse quickened in response, fear and adrenaline and something else. A spark of anticipation she didn't dare name, racing through her veins. The forest seemed to close in around her, each tree a jagged shadow, each gust of wind a whisper of warning. She could smell the damp earth, the frozen pine, the sharp tang of her own blood mingling with the crisp air. The world was alive with danger. And yet, even in that suffocating chill, she felt it. The pulse of life, the thrill of defiance, the whisper of something greater waiting for her if she could just survive long enough to see it. Another snap of a branch, and she pressed herself against a tree, chest heaving, listening. The growl was closer. The presence behind her was patient, calculating. She knew it wasn't just a mindless predator hunting blindly. It was intelligent. It was cruel. And it wanted her specifically. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but it also lit a fierce determination deep inside her. They could try to break her, could try to hunt her down and claim her, but she was not prey. She never had been. Not truly. Her thoughts flitted briefly to the mate she had been chosen for, the darkness that had chosen her, the evil that would bind her if she didn't escape. The injustice of it struck her anew. How could anyone expect her to submit? To bend to a life of terror and shadow? She clenched her fists again, feeling the silver flame pulse hotter, closer to the surface, like a heartbeat ready to erupt. She wasn't just running for survival anymore. She was running for freedom, for the right to claim her own destiny, to prove that the power inside her wasn't a curse but a gift. The fog thickened. Shapes moved in the distance, distorted and threatening. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run faster, to hide deeper, to push harder. She could feel exhaustion threatening to pull her down, every step heavier than the last, but she didn't stop. Not when the only alternative was surrender. Not when surrender meant chains and darkness and a life stolen from her. And then a faint glow, almost imperceptible, flickered across her hand. The silver flame, her secret, her curse, her gift, reacted to her will if only for a heartbeat. It was tiny, just a spark, but it filled her with a fierce hope. If she could just hold on, if she could just keep running, she might make it. She might survive. He might fight back. The growls shifted behind her, accompanied now by the faintest sound of movement above the wind, like claws scraping bark, eyes watching, calculating. She was close to exhaustion, close to despair, but her resolve hardened. She would not fall. Not tonight. Not to them. Not to him. And she would not let fear dictate her life anymore. Somewhere ahead, deep in the fog, a shadow moved differently from the others. She didn't know what it was, but instinct told her it was different. Not a threat, not entirely, but a possibility. A lifeline. And maybe, just maybe, it was the thing that would change everything. She forced herself to keep moving. Step after step, breath after breath. The snow and fog could not contain her. The cold could not hold her. The fear could not silence her. She was running towards something, or someone, and for the first time in a long time she felt the tiniest flicker of hope. And if you want to survive this danger with her, to see what waits beyond the fog, the darkness, and the forest full of shadows, then subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections now. Because here we tell stories that burn, stories that linger in your bones, stories that will make your heart ache and your soul leap. And hers is only just beginning. The fog thickened, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud, every step forward a negotiation with the earth and the shadows. She could hear it now, the faint crunch of snow behind her, deliberate, measured, and chilling. The growls had faded into silence, but the threat had not. Her pulse thundered in her ears, and the silver flame along her spine flared in response, tiny sparks of untamed energy that made her fingers tingle and her skin prickle as if the air itself were alive. She didn't know what awaited her, only that she had to keep moving. Then suddenly, movement. A shadow detaching itself from the blackened trees, gliding over snow like a whisper on the wind. It was unlike the predators that hunted her, unlike the cold and cruel eyes that had tracked her through the forest. This presence was measured, deliberate, controlled. Her heart hitched when he stepped into a pool of moonlight, tall, imposing, every line of his body radiating power, danger, and a certainty she didn't recognize. The Alpha King. She didn't know his name yet, but the aura surrounding him was unmistakable, magnetic, predatory, commanding. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't loud or commanding. It was low, intimate, almost a whisper that seemed to crawl inside her mind. Kiera, her name, breathed like a secret he'd carried across the frostbitten miles. He had been watching her. He knew. That simple, uttered recognition, the sound of her name on his lips, pulled something raw and vulnerable from her chest. She froze for the briefest heartbeat, the snow beneath her boots momentarily forgotten, and felt the gravity of his presence pull at her like a tide she could not resist. He moved closer, silently, effortlessly, like a shadow merging with the night. She wanted to recoil, to run, but her body, exhausted and trembling, betrayed her. He was weak. But he didn't press her weakness into a weapon. He extended a hand instead, steady and sure, offering safety without a word of demand. She hesitated, the conflict tearing through her. Trust battling instinct, desire fighting caution. And then finally, with a trembling exhale, she allowed herself to take it. His touch was electric, a brush of heat against cold skin, a grounding presence that both unnerved and reassured. He helped her to her feet, his hand lingering just long enough to send sparks dancing across her nerves. Snow clung to her hair, frosting her lashes, and he reached out, brushing it gently away. The contact was intimate, yet restrained, deliberate in its distance, yet full of unspoken promise. The air between them was taut with tension, charged with something neither dared to name, something forbidden yet inevitable. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He only studied her, eyes dark, unreadable, as if he were calculating her every fear, every heartbeat, every secret. But in those eyes she glimpsed something else, a shadow of understanding, a recognition of the battle raging inside her. He had his own demons, she realized. She could feel them just beneath the surface, masked by discipline, control, and power. Yet, in some inexplicable way, he understood her pain without needing to. A distant howl cut through the forest, sharp and urgent, and she flinched instinctively. He tightened his hold just slightly, grounding her, a silent promise. I will not let them touch you. It was a vow, spoken without words, yet heavier and more binding than any oath. And in that moment, Kiera felt a tremor of hope stir, fragile and tentative, but real. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was no longer completely alone in this frozen, hostile world. And if you want to follow her journey through danger, fear, and the stirring of something forbidden and powerful, then don't miss what happens next. Hit subscribe to Anne's romance collections now. Kiera stumbled slightly as she regained her balance. The alpha's presence a strange anchor, steady and relentless, beneath the trembling of her legs. Yet even in the warmth of that hand, in the strength of that gaze, the ghosts of her past pressed close, whispering doubts she could not silence. She had lived a lifetime in shadow, rejected by the pack that should have been her family, branded dangerous for powers she had barely begun to understand. Memories clawed at her mind, flashes of betrayal, accusations, exile. Too powerful. Too wild. Too dangerous. Words that had been thrown at her like knives. Words that left scars deeper than any wound the forest had inflicted tonight. She forced herself to breathe, inhaling the frigid air, tasting the snow and frost and the faint tang of her own blood. The alpha's eyes remained fixed on her, patient, calculating yet unreadable. It was unnerving, the way he seemed to see every fracture of her soul without judgment, as though he were staring straight into the parts of her she had buried long ago, parts she had promised never to reveal. Her silver flames stirred again beneath her skin, responding to the proximity of his presence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a flicker across her wrist, a warmth along her spine, but it made her shiver. It reminded her that she was not ordinary, never had been and never would be. Her power was a gift, a curse, a secret weapon that could either save her or destroy everything she held dear. And it had made her a target not only of the darkness stalking her tonight, but of those who feared what she could become. She stole a glance at him, wary yet curious. The Alpha King did not approach too closely, yet every movement, every slight adjustment of posture, every shift of his gaze spoke volumes. He had noticed her hesitation, her distrust, and perhaps even welcomed it. There was something in him, hidden and fierce, that intrigued her. She wanted to lean toward him, to confide even a fragment of the fear and longing twisting inside her, but caution held her frozen. She could not yet trust, could not yet risk revealing the fragile core that had been shattered too many times before. A crack of ice somewhere in the forest reminded her that danger had not disappeared. The shadows moved with intent, her chosen evil mate perhaps lurking, perhaps hunting, a dark promise she could neither ignore nor escape. Her heart thrummed painfully in her chest, caught between hope and fear, between the thrill of being seen and the terror of being claimed against her will. She pressed a hand to her side, wincing at the ache, and thought bitterly about the life she had been forced to flee, about the packs that had judged her too dangerous, too unpredictable to her. And yet, as she allowed herself to study the Alpha, she felt a faint glimmer of possibility. Perhaps she could survive this. Perhaps she could fight back, not alone but with him at her side. The thought was daring, reckless and terrifying, and yet irresistible. She wanted to trust him, wanted to lean into that touch that had steadied her just a heartbeat ago, wanted to share even a sliver of herself. But she couldn't let herself fall too far too fast. Not when the darkness she had fled was still close, circling, waiting for the moment to strike. The wind shifted, carrying a faint whisper through the trees, subtle but unmistakable. A shadow moved just beyond the edge of the fog, sleek and deliberate. Her chosen mate. The one who had marked her for a life she had refused. Her chest tightened and a low, involuntary growl escaped her lips, not from rage but from fear, defiance and something darker stirring inside her. She felt the silver flame pulse in response, stronger this time, a living thing beneath her skin, echoing her emotions ready to burst free. The Alpha's gaze flicked to the shadow, calm, assessing but unwavering. There was no fear there, only calculation, only a promise unspoken but felt in the marrow of her bones. He would not let this darkness claim her. And in that quiet, tense moment, with snow falling like frozen whispers around them, Kiera realized something she hadn't dared hope for. She was no longer entirely alone. Her mind raced, thoughts colliding. Can I survive? Can I even love? Can I trust anyone, or is that just another trap? And before she could answer, before she could even begin to process the torrent of emotion and fear, the shadow shifted again, a silent threat brushing against the edges of the fog. She stiffened, pulse spiking, ready to run, ready to fight, ready to ignite the silver flame that burned beneath her skin. And in the quiet between heartbeats she felt it, the magnetic pull of the Alpha King beside her, the heat of his presence, the unspoken promise that no matter how dark the forest became, no matter how relentless the enemy, she would not face it alone. The forest cleared into a hidden glade, the kind that seemed untouched by time or human recklessness. A faint mist hovered just above the earth, curling around roots and moss like fingers reaching for warmth. Kiera sank to the ground, exhaustion clawing at her limbs, her breaths shallow and rapid. Snowflakes had melted against her skin, leaving traces of cold that contrasted sharply with the fire that had been flickering within her all night. The Alpha King knelt beside her, his hands gentle yet firm as he untied the tattered remnants of her cloak and inspected the wound along her side. His eyes were unreadable, but beneath the dark depths lay a tenderness she hadn't expected. "This will sting," he murmured, voice low and careful. Kiera flinched as he began cleaning the wound, but the sting was nothing compared to the vulnerability curling inside her chest. She had been alone for so long, hunted, feared, and rejected, never allowed the comfort of touch, the warmth of understanding. Yet here he was, a man as dangerous as he was captivating, treating her injuries as if they were precious, fragile things, like he understood the weight she carried without her saying a single word. "You've carried so much," he said softly, voice almost a whisper, but it threaded through the quiet of the glade, settling on her like a balm. "Not all of it your fault. Not all of it deserved. And yet you survived. You endure." Her hands trembled, brushing snow and dirt from her lap, and she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. "I don't know how to trust," she confessed, voice breaking. "Not anymore. Not after everything. Not after the prophecy, not after being hunted. I'm too much." He shifted closer, close enough that the heat radiating from him pressed against the chill of the night. "Kiera," he said, eyes locking on hers with an intensity that burned through the fog of her fear, "I see all of you. Even the parts you hide from yourself, even the ones you fear are too dangerous, too broken." Her breath hitched. She wanted to lean into him, wanted to collapse against the strength that seemed impossible to ignore, but hesitation held her at bay. "Even what I'm afraid to be," she whispered. "Especially that," he replied, reaching out to tuck a strand of her damp hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary, the warmth of his touch threading through the icy residue of her fear. Her pulse raced, not just from the brush of skin against skin, but from the impossibility of feeling safe, seen, and desired all at once. They sat together in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them, the mist rising like a veil around the glade. Stories began to emerge in soft, careful words. The Alpha spoke of betrayals that had scarred him, pacts that had turned against him, allies that had failed, leadership responsibilities that had weighed like chains on his soul. Kiera's voice joined his eventually, hesitant at first, then surer as she confessed fears she had never voiced aloud. Fears of being rejected for her powers, of being a weapon rather than a person, of being the prophecy's curse rather than its hope. Every word threaded them closer, stitching fragile strands of trust into the gaps of their separate wounds. And when their eyes met, lingering a fraction too long, there was the faintest brush of their knees, a subtle closeness of shoulders, and the charged electricity of unspoken desire that neither could deny. He leaned slightly, close enough that she could feel his breath, his heartbeat vibrating through the space between them, yet still restrained. Her mind screamed caution, yet her body whispered longing. Could she trust him fully? Could she surrender even a fragment of herself to someone whose power rivaled her own, whose presence made the cold forest feel both safe and dangerous at the same time? "I want to trust," she admitted, voice barely audible. "I just don't know if I can." He cupped her face, thumb brushing the corner of her cheek, and she shivered again, not from the cold. "Then trust me this," he said, voice steady and low, every syllable a promise. "I see you, all of you, and I will not let anyone take you from yourself, or from me." The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the grove, and for a heartbeat the world felt still. The frost, the predators, the prophecy, all of it faded to a quiet hum as two wounded souls tentatively reached for each other, the intimacy electric, fragile, and utterly consuming. The tranquility shattered without warning. A sharp cry, a voice slicing through the night, carrying words that made Kiera's blood run cold. She is the child of the flame. The one the prophecy warned of. She froze, heart hammering, as pack members spilled into the glade, eyes wide with shock, horror, and greed. Some pointed, some murmured curses, and others stepped back as if afraid of what they glimpsed. The Alpha King stood immediately, protective, coiling into a stance that screamed both warning and challenge. "No," Kiera whispered, voice breaking, but the words fell uselessly among the swirling accusations. Her power flared instinctively, silver flame flickering up along her arms and fingers, brushing against the night air like live wire. Gasps and cries met her eyes. She could feel the fear, the awe, the danger she had always carried, now reflected in the faces of those she had once called her own. The Pack Council, usually reserved and controlled, denounced her outright, calling her dangerous, cursed, a weapon they could not allow to live unchecked. The weight of rejection, of betrayal, slammed into her chest harder than any blow from her enemies. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but the forest held its breath around her, watching the moment unfold like some ancient ritual. The Alpha hesitated, torn visibly between loyalty to his pack and the bond forming between them. Kiera could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the shadow in his eyes. His inner struggle mirrored her own. A desire to protect, an obligation to the world around them, and the impossible pull of the connection they had begun to forge. Her silver flame surged uncontrollably, responding to both her fear and her anger. Light flashed from her body, illuminating the glade in stark silver brilliance, shadows dancing and retreating as if the forest itself recognized her power. The air vibrated with energy, the ground trembling beneath the pulse of her fury. She was no longer a frightened girl. She was a force to be reckoned with, and everyone present felt it, awe and terror mingling in equal measure. "Get back!" the Alpha shouted, breaking from his hesitation to shield her, but it was too late. Kiera's power erupted, spilling into the night, shaking the trees, crackling over the frost-laden ground. Pack members stumbled, some shrieking in panic, others frozen in shock. She had wanted only to survive, to prove she could endure. But now she realized the scale of what she had become, and the cost of being seen, fully and unguarded. Tears streaked her face as realization struck. Even the Alpha could not contain the storm she had become. Her gaze swept over the pack, over the faces that had judged and betrayed her, and she felt both rage and sorrow. She could not stay here, could not risk harming those she had once known, could not let the fear and greed of others define her destiny. She turned, running into the shadows of the forest once more, the silver flame burning brighter than ever, illuminating her path, and leaving the audience suspended on the edge of the night. The Alpha King's voice followed, strained, furious, and almost desperate. "Kiera, you wait. I will find you." The wind carried her cries and the echoes of her power, and in that suspended moment, the forest held its breath. The betrayal had shattered the fragile trust, the world had turned against her, and yet within that chaos, something fierce and unstoppable was beginning to awaken. She was running, yes, but she was no longer defenseless. And in the heart of the night she made a silent vow: "They will regret ever underestimating me." The night had grown thick, oppressive, as though the very air held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Kiera ran through the forest with purpose now, limbs burning, lungs screaming, the silver flame surging beneath her skin, no longer timid, no longer faltering. Every step forward was an assertion. She would not be a pawn, a victim, or a whispered warning. She was power incarnate, destiny incarnate, and she would claim it. The clearing came into view, and the sight stole her breath for a moment. The ritual site, a circle of stones older than memory, etched with ancient runes, glowing faintly in the moonlight, was under siege. Shadow beasts prowled the perimeter, claws gouging the earth, eyes like molten coals, while rogue alphas barked orders that carried menace, authority, and cruelty all at once. At the center, her Alpha King was cornered, surrounded by enemies, his eyes scanning desperately for an opening, for a way to shield her, for any thread of hope in a night designed to consume them. Kiera's chest heaved as she slowed to a stop at the edge of the clearing, feeling the surge within her like a living thing. Her silver flame erupted in sudden brilliance, tendrils of light licking the ground, coiling around roots and stones. She could hear the whispers of her ancestors now, faint but insistent, urging her to rise, to claim, to burn. Her forbidden shift began. Muscles twisting, senses sharpening beyond human perception, a pulse thrumming through her veins that made her eyes glow with molten silver. The forest itself seemed to respond. The wind picked up, carrying a chorus of whispers through the branches, and the earth beneath trembled as though recognizing her command. She stepped into the clearing and the first wave of enemies faltered, uncertainty flickering across their eyes. The silver flame coiled along her limbs, not destructive yet, but undeniably powerful, threatening, and beautiful. Her heart raced, but beneath it was clarity, focus, and resolve. No more hiding, no more running. She would meet this threat whatever it demanded. The rogue alpha lunged at her, claws outstretched, and instinctively she shifted fully. Her body moved with unnatural speed, fluid and precise, striking with a force that sent him skidding across the frost-covered ground. She felt her power respond to every emotion. Fear sharpened her reflexes, anger fed the fire, and every pulse of desire to protect her alpha king lent weight to her blows. The forest echoed with light, sound, and tremor, a living battlefield dancing in rhythm with her emergence. "Step back," the alpha king roared, but he knew she did not need him, he never had. His eyes, however, never left hers, admiration and longing threading through the danger that surrounded them. "Kiera, no one deserves this alone." She flared her hand, releasing a burst of silver fire that arced across the clearing, striking a rogue alpha and sending him flying into the circle of runes. The stones reacted, glowing brighter, vibrating, ancient power awakening at her command. Animals in the forest paused, spirits stirred, the very night itself bending to acknowledge her presence. She was no longer the hunted girl, the pawn, or the scared exile. She was the child of the flame, the one whose power could turn the tide of worlds. And yet her gaze fell on the figure who had orchestrated this night. The real villain, cloaked in shadow, every movement deliberate, calculated, and malevolent. His eyes, black as void, fixed on her, measuring, mocking, daring her to embrace the very fire he sought to control. The rogue alphas, the beasts, all faded into insignificance compared to him. "Do you truly think you can stop me?" His voice rolled across the clearing, smooth, dangerous, yet tinged with amusement. "You are a child playing with fire you cannot control." Kiera's lips pressed into a thin line, and she felt the silver flame pulse along her body in response. Not fear but defiance. "I am not your sacrifice," she said, voice ringing with authority, reverberating through the clearing. "I am not yours. I am mine." The words ignited something in her, and her forbidden shift surged fully, limbs elongating slightly, senses piercing the night, every muscle a weapon, every heartbeat a drum of power. Light burst from her eyes, her hands, her chest, illuminating the grove, making shadows flee into corners that could no longer hide. The earth quaked in response, stones shivering, the runes ablaze with ancestral recognition. The silver flame coiled outward, brushing the enemy's edges, making them stumble, retreat, and reconsider their audacity. The Alpha King moved to her side instinctively, but for the first time he did not reach to protect her. He stood beside her as equal, sharing in the surge of her might. Their eyes met, unspoken understanding flowing in the spaces between them. She was no longer fragile. She was force, destiny, and fire incarnate, and he would not shield her from it. He would witness it. The villain's smirk faltered for a fraction of a heartbeat. He had expected fear, submission, uncertainty, but Kiera radiated none of it. Her silver flame pulsed, tendrils stretching toward him, coiling and snapping like living serpents. He circled, calculating, but each step met resistance. The very forest seemed to rise behind her, the stones vibrating, the wind bending to her command. "Your power is mine to take," he shouted, voice cracking with fury. But Kiera only smiled faintly, the first time in weeks, and it was not joy. It was recognition of inevitability. She had awakened. She had claimed what was hers. She would not be bent, broken, or sacrificed. The standoff stretched, a tableau of light, shadow, and raw tension. Kiera's breathing slowed, but the silver flame never waned, coiling around her like living armor, responding to every micro-expression, every subtle move of the villain. He had underestimated her, underestimated the depth of her heart, the fury of her spirit. and the bond that tied her to the Alpha King at her side. Every instinct screamed that the moment of reckoning was at hand. The villain's gaze locked on her, calculating the next strike, but the night itself seemed to whisper, "You cannot touch her. Not now. Not ever." The clearing shimmered with the silver flame's brilliance, the runes glowing as if alive, the forest holding its breath as the impossible tableau held between predator and flame, darkness and light. And in that charged silence, the audience is left suspended, hearts pounding, breath caught in throat, witnessing the transformation not just of power but of identity. Kiera had stepped fully into her destiny, embracing the force she had feared, the fire she had hidden, the self she had been told was too dangerous to exist. But the outcome, whether she would strike the villain down or face a more terrible twist, remained uncertain. The night held its secrets tightly, trembling, alive, waiting for the next heartbeat to ignite the battle anew. The clearing fell silent once more, the silver flame retreating into Kiera's body like a storm withdrawing beneath the mountains. Only the faint shimmer of residual light clung to the edges of the stones, breathing life into the runes that had borne witness to her power. Her chest rose and fell, rapid at first, then slowing as adrenaline ebbed, yet her heart refused to settle entirely. She had survived. She had fought. She had transformed, but the echoes of what she had unleashed lingered, and so did the question. What would the world do now that it had seen her in full fire? The Alpha King stood beside her, still vigilant, eyes scanning the shadows for the villain who had slipped away into darkness, cunning and alive. He did not speak, yet his presence spoke volumes. A silent promise, a tether of trust and unspoken desire. Kiera met his gaze, finding in it a reflection of her own uncertainty and determination. And here, in this suspended moment, the forest seemed to lean in closer, the mist curling like a sentient thing around them, whispering questions that hung in the air. Would you have chosen her, or feared her too? The words echoed not just through the grove, but through the mind of anyone who dared imagine themselves in her place. Is she a hero, or a girl cursed with too much fire? Each syllable trembled on the edge of fear and wonder, probing the soul, tugging at the heart. Could one survive power this immense? Could one survive it and remain human, compassionate, worthy of love? The wind stirred again, carrying the faint scent of smoke and frost, weaving between trees like a message from the past and the future at once. Kiera's hair lifted in the whispering breeze, her eyes still alight with molten silver fire, the air thick with the residue of transformation. And as the echoes lingered, as the unanswered questions clawed at the edges of thought, a soft, insistent voice, the narrator's intimate and urgent, reached out like a hand to the audience. If this story lit something inside you, if her fire, her struggle, her courage touched the edges of your soul, subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections. We tell tales that burn. Tales that reach beyond fear, beyond the shadows, beyond the ordinary. Tales where love, danger, and destiny collide in ways you cannot forget. The light of the silver flame dimmed to a faint pulse, a heartbeat shared between heroine and audience alike, leaving every listener suspended, poised between fear and anticipation, aching to follow the story further. Kiera and the Alpha stepped slowly from the clearing, snow crunching beneath their boots, their breaths curling like ghosts in the cold night air. The forest behind them remained shadowed, dense, alive with secrets. Branches swayed, leaves whispered, and somewhere deep within the woods, a distant howl sliced through the silence, low, primal, and filled with an intelligence that promised challenges yet unseen. The ground trembled faintly beneath them, subtle but insistent, as if the earth itself acknowledged that power had been claimed, but not all threats laid to rest. Kiera's silver eyes glimmered, reflecting not just moonlight but the smoldering embers of untapped potential. The Alpha's hand brushed hers in passing, a gentle anchor, a tether between them, yet his gaze remained forward, wary, sensing more than the night could reveal. The narrator's voice softened, low and prophetic, almost a whisper carried on the wind. She is not the only one. Pause, letting the words hang like mist. The true Alpha hasn't risen, yet. A rustle, subtle but deliberate, echoed from the shadows. Somewhere beyond the snow-laden trees, other beings stirred, creatures of power, ancient and patient, watching, waiting for the moment to intervene. Perhaps allies. Perhaps foes. Perhaps something in between, and certainly someone who would challenge Kiera and her Alpha in ways they could not yet imagine. The moonlight caught on the runes still faintly glowing behind them, marking a place of transformation, a battlefield now sacred and forever altered. The forest seemed to pulse with the aftershocks of her silver flame, a living testament to the girl who had claimed herself, who had refused to be anyone's sacrifice. The wind shifted, carrying a whisper of prophecy, a warning and a promise all at once. New paths will open. Greater dangers await. And love will demand more than either is ready to give. The scene faded slowly into shadow, the night holding its breath, the distant howls echoing like a heartbeat across the glade, leaving the audience suspended in awe, curiosity, and an ache for what comes next. Even as the screen darkened, one thought lingered, wrapping around every listener. This story is far from over. The next chapter waits. The fire has been lit. And for those who dare follow, the journey will burn. The narrator's final note, intimate and insistent, reached across the void. Stay close. Watch. Subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections, where every story pulses with heart, danger, and desire, and where the flames never die.